The blizzard hit Camp Verde, Arizona, with a fury nobody had seen in 40 years, turning the January desert into a white tomb that swallowed everything whole. Julia Foster pressed her face against the frosted window of the general store, watching the snow pile higher against the door, knowing with a sinking certainty that she was trapped here, until spring thawed the mountain passes, trapped in a town where her father's debts had chased her, where his creditors waited like vultures for payment she could never make. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, worn down by the weight of promises she had never made but was expected to keep. The store owner, Mr. Hendricks, had left 2 days ago before the worst of the storm hit, heading to Prescott to fetch his pregnant daughter. He had asked Julia to mind the place, promised her wages and a warm stove, and she had agreed because the alternative was sleeping in the stable behind the saloon where men looked at her with hungry eyes. Now she was alone with dwindling supplies and a cold that seeped through every crack in the wooden walls. She rationed the food carefully. A can of beans every other day, hardtack that tasted like sawdust. The water barrel outside had frozen solid, so she melted snow in a pot over the stove, watching the pristine white turn to gray as the ash from the fire mixed in. At night, she wrapped herself in every blanket and bolt of fabric she could find, creating a nest near the stove that barely kept the cold at bay. The wind howled like wounded animals, and the silence between gusts felt even worse, pressing down on her until she thought she might scream just to hear another human sound. 5 days into the storm, she heard the horse. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks, but then came the unmistakable sound of hooves crunching through snow, slow and labored. Julia grabbed the rifle Mr. Hendricks kept behind the counter, her hands shaking from cold and fear. She had never fired a gun in her life, but desperation made people capable of terrible things. The knock came hard and urgent. A man's voice, rough with exhaustion, called out, "Please, my horse is dying." She should not have opened the door. Every instinct screamed caution. But something in his voice, a raw honesty, made her slide the bolt back. The wind nearly ripped the door from her hands, and snow blasted into the store like a living thing. The man stumbled inside, leading a massive chestnut mare whose legs trembled with each step. Julia threw her weight against the door, forcing it shut against the storm's rage. When she turned, she found herself staring at a man who looked half frozen, ice crusting his dark beard, his hat so covered in snow it had turned completely white. His eyes were the color of strong coffee, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her take a step back. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "Another hour out there and we would both be dead." "You cannot keep a horse in here," Julia said, trying to sound firm even as her teeth chattered. "She saved my life getting me this far. I will not let her freeze now." He led the mare toward the stove, and the animal followed him with the devotion of a loyal dog. "I am Austin Donovan. I was trying to reach the mining camp up in the mountains when the storm caught me. Julia Foster." She kept the rifle pointed vaguely in his direction, though her arms ached from the weight. "There is not much food. I have supplies in my saddlebags." He began unbuckling them with fingers so stiff they barely worked. "Salt pork, cornmeal, coffee. We can share." The mention of coffee nearly made her weep. She had run out 3 days ago, and the headache from the lack of it pounded behind her eyes like a drumbeat. She lowered the rifle slowly. "How long have you been riding in this?" 2 days, maybe 3. Hard to tell when the sun does not show. He pulled off his coat and snow cascaded to the floor. Underneath, his clothes were soaked through. "I need to get dry before the cold sets into my bones." Julia felt her face heat. "There are men's clothes in the back. Mr. Hendricks keeps them for miners who come through. I will make coffee while you change." She busied herself with the coffee pot, hands shaking as she measured out the precious grounds. Behind her, she heard him moving around, the rustle of fabric, a sharp hiss that suggested frozen skin meeting air. She kept her eyes firmly on the stove, but her awareness of him filled the entire room. When he returned, dressed in dry wool pants and a flannel shirt that pulled tight across his shoulders, he looked younger than she had first thought. Maybe 27 or 28, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He had left his beard but cleaned the ice from it, and now she could see a scar running along his jawline, white against sun-bronzed skin. "You are here alone?" he asked, settling near the stove where his horse already stood, the animal's shivers beginning to subside. "The owner left before the worst of it hit. I was supposed to be watching the place for a few days." Julia poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the smell alone enough to make her dizzy with relief. "That was over a week ago. The passes will be closed until March at least, maybe April." He took the cup she offered, wrapping both hands around it like a man holding something precious. "This is the worst storm I have seen since I was a boy in Montana. I cannot stay here until April. I have nowhere to go after, no money, nothing." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, exhaustion loosening her tongue. "My father died owing money to half the territory. I came here thinking I could start fresh, but his creditors found me anyway. They want payment, and I have nothing to give." Austin studied her over the rim of his cup. "What kind of debts?" "Gambling mostly. Some business deals that went bad. He was not a careful man." Bitterness crept into her voice. "He was not much of a father either, but he was all I had." "How much?" $300. "I might as well owe 3,000. Julia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I have been working at the saloon as a waitress, saving every penny, but at this rate I will be 60 before I can pay it off." "The saloon?" His jaw tightened. "That is no place for a woman alone." "It is the only place that would hire me. Apparently, my father's reputation extends to everyone except the saloon owner, and he only hired me because I am young and the minors like to look." She set her cup down harder than necessary. "I do what I must to survive. We do not all have the luxury of pride." "I meant no judgment." Austin's voice softened. "I know what it is to be desperate. I have been there myself." The wind hammered against the building, rattling the windows in their frames. Julia pulled a blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Why were you heading to the mining camp in winter? That seems like poor planning." "My brother works up there. He sent word that he was sick, asked me to come." Austin stared into his coffee like he could read the future in its depths. "I was too late to save him. Got there and found his crew had already buried him in a shallow grave. Ground was too frozen to dig deep. They gave me his things and I was heading back when the storm hit. I am sorry." The words felt inadequate, tiny against the weight of his loss. We had not spoken in 2 years. Stupid argument about land our father left us. I told him the silver mine was a fool's dream, that he should take his half of the inheritance and start a ranch like me. Austin's hands tightened around the cup. "He told me I had no ambition, that I was content to wallow in mediocrity." We both said things we could not take back. You came when he called. That is what matters. Does it? His eyes met hers and she saw the guilt there, raw and bleeding. I was 3 days too late. 3 days. If I had left when I first got his letter instead of finishing up with the winter feeding, if I had ridden harder, pushed through the night. You cannot think that way. It will drive you mad. Julia knew about regret, about the weight of what-ifs that crushed you slowly. My father died while I was at church. I had argued with him that morning about his drinking, told him I was tired of cleaning up his messes. Those were the last words I ever spoke to him. I have to live with that. They sat in silence. two strangers bound by grief and the storm that raged outside. The horse shifted, her breathing finally settling into a calmer rhythm. Austin stood and checked her over, running practiced hands along her legs, murmuring soft words Julia could not quite hear. "She will be all right," he said finally. "She is tougher than she looks, as are most females." Julia allowed herself a small smile. "I will not argue that." Austin returned to his spot by the stove. "So we are trapped here together until the storm breaks. We should probably figure out how to survive without killing each other. I promise not to shoot you if you promise not to do anything that would make me want to." Julia gestured at the rifle still propped against the counter. "Fair terms." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. "We split the supplies evenly. Take turns keeping the fire going through the night. I will sleep near the door, you take the back room." "There is no heat in the back room. The stove does not reach that far." Austin considered this, his expression carefully neutral. "Then we make barriers with the shelves. Give you privacy but keep you near the warmth." They spent the next hour rearranging the store, creating a small alcove for Julia near the stove while maintaining a respectful distance. Austin worked efficiently, moving heavy shelves like they weighed nothing, never once making her feel uncomfortable or unsafe. It was strange, this instant sense of security she felt around him. Perhaps it was the grief they shared, or perhaps it was simply that she was too tired to maintain her walls. That night, she lay in her makeshift bed and listened to him breathe on the other side of the shelf barrier. The wind continued its assault, but inside their small refuge, something like peace settled over her. For the first time since the storm began, she did not feel utterly alone. The days blurred together, time marked only by the coffee they shared each morning and the slow depletion of their supplies. Austin proved to be a man of few words but steady presence. He kept the fire going, melted snow for water, and rationed their food with careful precision. He spoke of his ranch, a spread of land in the valley below the mountains where he raised cattle and broke horses. It was not much, he admitted, but it was his. Julia found herself talking more than she had in years. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, before her mother died and her father descended into gambling and drink. She spoke of her dreams of opening a dress shop, of creating beautiful things instead of just surviving. He listened without judgment, asking questions that showed he actually cared about her answers. On the 5th day of their confinement together, she woke to find him standing at the window, his expression troubled. "What is wrong?" She joined him, peering out at the endless white. "The wind changed direction last night. It is blowing from the north now, straight down from the mountains." Austin pointed at the drifts that had piled against the building's north side, nearly reaching the roof. "If it keeps up, we could be buried completely. Can we dig out in this cold? We would freeze before we made it 10 feet. He turned from the window, his jaw set with determination. "We need to conserve heat. The stove is eating through the wood too fast." They moved their sleeping areas closer to the stove, abandoning any pretense of separation for the sake of survival. That night, Julia woke shivering despite being wrapped in every blanket they had. The fire had burned low and the cold pressed in like something physical. "Julia," Austin's voice came from nearby. "Are you all right? Just cold?" Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. She heard him moving, and then he was beside her, wrapping his blankets around her as well, pulling her against his chest. She should have protested, should have maintained propriety, but his warmth was too desperately needed. She curled into him, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. "Better?" he asked, his breath stirring her hair. "Yes." It came out as barely a whisper. My brother and I used to sleep like this during the bad winters when we were boys. Body heat can mean the difference between life and death. His arms tightened slightly. Just survival, nothing improper. I know. And she did. There was nothing predatory in his touch, nothing that made her feel unsafe. If anything, she felt protected for the first time since her father died. Thank you, sleep. I will keep watch. But she felt him drift off eventually, his breathing deepening, his hold on her relaxing into something natural. Julia lay awake longer, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been alone and terrified, convinced she would die in this cold wooden box. Now she lay in the arms of a man she barely knew, and somehow it felt right in a way nothing had felt right for a very long time. Morning brought a break in the wind, and with it, a dangerous idea. Austin stood at the window, calculating distances with the eye of a man who understood wilderness survival. The stable behind the saloon, he said. That is where you were staying before, when I could afford it. Why? Because the saloon keeper will have food stores. Real supplies, not just what travelers leave behind. Austin turned to face her. If we are going to be trapped here until spring, we need more than salt pork and cornmeal. You want to go out in this. You said yourself we would freeze. The wind has died down. If we move fast, keep close to the buildings, we might make it. He was already pulling on his heavy coat. It is a risk, but starving is a guarantee if we stay. Then I am coming with you. You do not know the town. Absolutely not. It is too dangerous. Julia stood, drawing herself up to her full height, which was still a head shorter than him. This is not a discussion. You need someone who knows which buildings are stable and which might collapse under the snow weight. I know this town. You do not. They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Austin nodded, a reluctant respect in his eyes. Stay close to me. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. They wrapped themselves in every piece of warm clothing they could layer on, tying rope around their waists to keep them connected. Austin made Julia take the middle section, with him in front breaking trail and the horse behind, the mare's bulk providing some shelter from the cold. Opening the door was like opening a portal to another world. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing the breath from Julia's lungs. Snow had drifted halfway up the door, and Austin had to force his way through it, creating a path she could follow. The town looked alien, familiar buildings transformed into white mounds, streets completely erased. They moved slowly, testing each step. Twice Austin stopped her from walking where the snow concealed gaps between buildings, spaces that would have swallowed her whole. The cold was beyond anything Julia had experienced, burning her lungs with each breath, making her face feel like someone was pressing knives into it. The saloon materialized out of the white, its false front barely visible above the drifts. The door was frozen shut, and Austin had to slam his shoulder against it repeatedly before it gave way. They stumbled inside, and Julia felt tears freeze on her cheeks from the relief of being out of the wind. The saloon was tomb cold but better than outside. Austin got the horse settled in what had been the main room, then they explored the kitchen area. The saloon keeper had indeed left stores behind, sacks of flour and beans, jars of preserved fruit, even a wheel of cheese in the cold storage. They loaded as much as they could carry into sacks, working quickly, knowing every minute inside was a minute less they could survive the return journey. Julia, Austin's voice held a warning note. Come here. She joined him at the window overlooking the street. At first, she did not see what had caught his attention, but then movement caught her eye. 3 men on horseback, moving slowly down the buried street, searching for something. Daltrey, Julia breathed, recognizing the lead rider even bundled in his heavy coat. He is one of the men my father owed money to. What is he doing out in this, looking for me? Cold dread settled in her stomach. He told me before the storm that if I did not pay by spring, he would take payment another way. He has been pressuring me to work for him in the rooms upstairs. Austin's expression went hard. Over my dead body. He has 2 men with him. We should hide. They crouched below the window, hardly daring to breathe. The sound of horses crunching through snow grew louder, then stopped. Julia heard voices, muffled by the wind and walls, but clearly arguing. Then one word came through crystal clear. Store. They are going to check the general store, Austin whispered. They will find our tracks. What do? We wait until they are inside, then we make for the stable. There is a back way out, leads to the canyon trail. He checked his gun, face grim. Can you ride? Not well. You will have to learn fast. Austin grabbed the supply sacks. When I say move, we move, no hesitation. They watched through the crack in the door as the 3 men dismounted at the general store, kicking their way through the drifts Austin and Julia had made earlier. The moment they disappeared inside, Austin yanked open the door. Now. They ran, as much as anyone could run through waist-deep snow, pulling the horse behind them. Julia's lungs burned, her legs screamed in protest, but Austin's hand was iron around her wrist, dragging her forward when she stumbled. They reached the stable and Austin threw her onto the mare's back, tossing the supply sacks up after her, then swung up behind her. The horse lunged forward, powerful muscles propelling them through the snow. Behind them, Julia heard shouting. A gunshot cracked through the cold air and the mare screamed but kept running. Austin guided her toward the canyon, toward a trail Julia could barely see through the blowing snow. They will follow, she gasped. Their horses are tired. Belle is fresh. Austin leaned low over the mare's neck, urging her faster. Hold on. The canyon walls rose around them, providing some shelter from the wind. Austin pushed the mare hard, following some instinct or memory Julia could not see. The trail, if it could even be called that, wound upward into the mountains, treacherous and barely visible. Where are we going? Julia clung to the mare's mane, certain she would fall with every lurching step. My ranch. It is the only safe place now. Austin's voice was tight with concentration. The trail is bad, but I have traveled it 100 times. Trust me. She did trust him, Julia realized with some surprise. This man she had known for less than a week, she trusted him with her life. Perhaps it was madness brought on by cold and fear, or perhaps it was something deeper, some recognition of kindred spirits finding each other in the storm. The journey took hours, or maybe days. Time lost meaning as they climbed higher, the wind returning with savage fury. Austin wrapped his coat around Julia as much as he could, his body shielding her from the worst of it. She felt him shaking with cold and exhaustion, but he never wavered, never stopped guiding the mare forward. When the cabin finally appeared, Julia thought she was hallucinating. It was small, sturdy, built into the side of the mountain with a barn attached. Austin half fell from the horse, then caught Julia as she slid down. Her legs would not hold her and she crumpled into the snow. Stay with me, Austin commanded, lifting her in his arms. Just a little further. He kicked open the cabin door and carried her inside, setting her near a cold fireplace before rushing back out for the horse and supplies. Julia tried to help him start a fire, but her hands would not cooperate, fingers numb and useless. Austin had to do everything, his own hands barely functioning better, but eventually flames caught and grew, pushing back the deadly cold. They sat together as close to the fire as they dared, wrapped in blankets, neither speaking. Belle stood in the corner of the cabin, too large to fit in the barn that Austin said was already full of his other horses. The mare's presence was oddly comforting, a reminder that they had survived. "I am sorry," Julia finally said. "I brought this danger to you. Those men have no honor, threatening a woman over debts that were not hers." Austin's voice was rough with anger and exhaustion. "You did nothing wrong. Your father's sins are not yours to carry. The law would disagree. Debts pass to the children. Then the law is wrong." He looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were fierce. "I will not let them take you. I will pay your father's debts myself if I must. I cannot ask that of you. $300 is a fortune. I have it. The sale of my last cattle herd, money I was saving to expand the ranch." Austin reached out and brushed snow from her hair, the gesture tender. "I would rather spend it keeping you safe." "Why?" Julia whispered. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because in a week of being trapped together, I have seen more of your character than most people show in a year. Because you risked yourself to help gather supplies. Because you make terrible coffee but still try. Because when you smile, it is like the sun breaking through clouds." He cupped her face gently. "Because I think I am falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than any storm." Julia's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this with such raw honesty. "You barely know me. I know you are brave. I know you are kind. I know you take responsibility for things that are not your fault because you have a sense of honor." Austin's thumb traced her cheekbone. "I know that I have never felt this way about anyone, and I am too old to pretend otherwise. I am falling in love with you too." The words came out as barely a whisper, but they felt like the truest thing she had ever said. "It is madness. Then we are both mad." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Julia met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, nothing like the rough demands she had feared from men. It was a question, and she answered it by deepening the contact, her cold hands reaching up to tangle in his hair. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me, not just until the storm ends. Stay here at the ranch. Let me court you properly. Let us see where this goes. What about the debt? Daltrey will not give up. Then I will pay him off, and if he causes trouble after that, I will deal with him." Austin's voice turned hard. "I am not without influence in this territory. I know the sheriff in Prescott, and he owes me a favor. If Daltrey or his men show their faces around here, they will regret it." "You would do all that for me. I would do anything for you." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Julia felt something inside her begin to heal, some broken piece clicking back into place. They slept that night in each other's arms, the fire burning bright and warm. And for the first time since her father died, Julia dreamed of the future instead of the past. The storm raged for another week, but inside the cabin, they built something new. Austin taught her to cook over the fireplace, laughing when she burned the biscuits. She mended his clothes with a skill that impressed him, creating neat stitches from scraps she found in his supplies. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories, hopes, fears. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the hard years when he almost lost everything to drought and disease. She told him about the dress shop she dreamed of opening, how she loved to create beautiful things from fabric and thread. They spoke of his brother, of her father, laying their ghosts to rest together. The physical attraction between them grew impossible to ignore. The small space meant constant proximity, and every touch, accidental or deliberate, sparked like flint on steel. Austin was always respectful, never pushing beyond what Julia offered, but she could see the hunger in his eyes, the restraint that cost him one night. With the fire burning low and the wind finally quiet outside, Julia made her choice. She crossed the small distance between their sleeping areas and slipped beneath his blankets. Austin went very still. "Julia," he said, voice strained, "you do not have to do this." "I know I want to." She pressed against him, feeling his heart hammering. "I love you, Austin. I want to be yours in every way. We should wait until we are married." But his arms came around her, holding her tight. "Married?" Hope and fear tangled in her chest. "I am asking. Poorly, I know, but I am asking." Austin pulled back enough to look at her face. "Marry me, Julia Foster. Let me spend my life making you happy. Let me give you the safety and love you deserve." "Yes." She was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then with all the passion he had been restraining, and Julia met him with equal fire. That night, with the storm finally breaking outside and stars beginning to appear through the clouds, they made promises to each other that went beyond words. When spring finally came, melting the snow and opening the trails, Austin made good on his word. They rode to Prescott together, Austin paying off Julia's father's debts in full while the sheriff stood witness. Daltrey took the money with a scowl but could do nothing in the face of official documentation. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Morrison who clearly respected Austin, made it very clear that Julia was under his protection now, and any harassment would be met with the full weight of the law. They were married in a small church in Prescott, with Morrison and his wife standing as witnesses. Julia wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Austin bought her, pale blue calico that made her eyes bright. Austin wore his best suit, his hair trimmed and beard neat, looking like a different man from the half-frozen stranger who had stumbled into the general store. The ranch became their home. It was small, just a cabin and barn with a few outbuildings, but it was theirs. Austin taught Julia to ride properly, patient as she learned to control the horses. She started a small garden, coaxing vegetables from the hard mountain soil. In the evenings, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the valley, talking about everything and nothing. That first summer, Austin hired a few ranch hands to help with the cattle, men who treated Julia with respectful courtesy and worked hard for fair wages. She cooked for them, creating hearty meals that became legendary in the valley. Word spread that Austin Donovan's wife could make a simple beef stew taste like a feast. Julia also began taking on sewing work, making dresses and shirts for the women and men in the valley. Her skill with a needle was exceptional, and soon she had more work than she could handle. Austin built her a small workroom in the cabin, with good light and shelves for her fabrics and threads. It was not the dress shop she had dreamed of, but it was a start, and it was hers. The first winter came, and with it, the memory of the storm that had brought them together. They prepared carefully, laying in supplies, making sure the barn was secure and the cabin well stocked. When the first snow fell, Julia stood at the window and watched it come down, but this time there was no fear, only gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Austin asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "That I am glad for that storm. As terrible as it was, it brought you to me." She leaned back against him. "Everything I lost, everything I suffered, it led me here, to you, to this life. I think about that too. If I had left a day earlier to see my brother or taken a different trail, we never would have met." Austin kissed her temple. "I am sorry for my brother, but I am grateful for what came after. You think he would approve of us? I think he would be happy I found someone who challenges me, who makes me want to be better." Austin turned her in his arms. "He always said I was too stubborn, too set in my ways. You have proven him right. I have not changed you that much. You have changed everything." He kissed her, soft and sweet. "You made me believe in second chances." That winter, Julia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. The nearest doctor was in Prescott, a day's ride away in good weather, and everyone knew stories of births that went wrong in the isolated ranches and mines of the territory. Austin became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Julia from doing anything that might be considered strenuous. She tolerated it with amusement for a while, then finally sat him down and explained that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was not made of glass. "I know," he said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "But what if something goes wrong? What if I lose you? You will not lose me. I am too stubborn to die." Julia took his face in her hands. "I am scared too, but we will face this together like we face everything." When her time came in early summer, Austin rode like a madman to fetch Mrs. Morrison, the sheriff's wife who was known as the best midwife in the territory. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Austin, pacing outside the cabin door, thought he would lose his mind from hearing Julia's cries. But when Mrs. Morrison finally emerged, she was smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Donovan, a big, healthy boy with a set of lungs on him." Austin rushed inside to find Julia exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the blanket she had sewn during the winter. The baby had dark hair and a red, angry face, screaming his displeasure at being born. "He is perfect," Austin breathed, settling carefully on the bed beside them. "He looks like you." Julia guided the baby into Austin's arms, laughing at his terrified expression. "You will not break him." Austin held his son with the same care he would hold the most precious thing in the world because he was. They named him James, after Julia's grandfather, and he became the light of their lives. Fatherhood softened something in Austin. He was patient with the baby's cries, walking him through the night when Julia was too exhausted. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving horses into the wood. He spoke to James constantly, telling him stories of the ranch, of the mountains, of the mother who loved him more than life itself. Julia watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love with him. This hard man, weathered by years of survival in a harsh land, became gentle in the presence of his child. It was a side of him she had glimpsed in their intimate moments, but now saw fully expressed. The years flowed like the creek that ran through their property. James grew into a sturdy boy, following his father around the ranch, mimicking his walk and speech. Julia's sewing business flourished, and Austin expanded the ranch, buying more land and cattle. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When James was 3, Julia became pregnant again. This time the fear was less, replaced by excitement. They knew what to expect, knew they could handle whatever came. The baby arrived on a cold January night, almost 5 years to the day after the storm that had brought them together. Their daughter had Julia's auburn hair and Austin's dark eyes. They named her Sarah, and from the moment she arrived, she owned her father's heart. Austin, who had been gently firm with James, became putty in Sarah's tiny hands. Julia teased him about it mercilessly. "She has you wrapped around her finger," she said, watching him rock the baby to sleep. "She is so small," Austin murmured, wonder in his voice. "I forgot how small they start." James was this small once. Was he? I do not remember him being this tiny. Austin looked up, grinning. "We make beautiful children, Mrs. Donovan. We do indeed, Mr. Donovan." Life continued its rhythm. James started school in Camp Verde, riding down with Austin once a week for lessons with the schoolteacher. Sarah grew into a fiery little girl who had opinions about everything and the will to express them loudly. Julia opened a small dress shop in town, just a room above the new general store, but it was the dream she had carried for so long finally realized. On their 10th anniversary, Austin took Julia back to the original general store where they had met. It was still standing, though under new ownership now. They walked through it together, remembering those desperate days when they had been strangers fighting for survival. "I was so scared," Julia admitted, standing at the window where she had first seen him arrive. "I thought I would die alone in this building, buried under snow, and no one would find me until spring. I was scared too, not just of the storm, but of what I was feeling." Austin pulled her close. "I knew the moment I saw you that you were going to change my life. Part of me wanted to run." "Why did you not?" "Because the bigger part of me knew that if I ran, I would regret it forever." He kissed her, there in the dusty old store, and it felt like coming full circle. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Julia. You and our children, this life we built. I would go through that storm 1,000 times if it meant finding you at the end." "I love you," Julia said, tears streaming down her face. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." They returned to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. James and Sarah ran out to meet them, shouting about the day's adventures. Austin swung Sarah up onto his shoulders while Julia held James's hand, and together they walked toward the cabin that had become a home filled with love and laughter. That night, after the children were asleep, Austin and Julia sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and constant, the same stars that had looked down on them that first terrible winter. "You ever regret it?" Austin asked quietly. "The life you might have had if you had gone back to St. Louis, found some city gentleman?" "Never." Julia spoke with absolute certainty. "This life with you in this wild, beautiful place, it is more than I ever dared to dream. You gave me safety when I had none, love when I thought I was unworthy of it, a home when I was lost. You gave me the same." Austin pulled her onto his lap, and she settled there like she belonged, because she did. "You took a broken man and made him whole. You gave me a family, a reason to build instead of just survive." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and Belle answered from the barn with a soft nicker. The wind whispered through the pine trees, but it was gentle now, a summer breeze instead of a winter storm. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. James grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's skill with horses. By the time he was 15, he could break a wild horse better than any man in the valley. Sarah proved to have her mother's artistic eye, creating drawings and paintings that captured the beauty of the landscape around them. Austin's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Julia found laugh lines around her eyes. They wore the marks of their years together with pride, each wrinkle and scar a testament to a life fully lived. When James turned 18, a young woman named Catherine moved to Camp Verde with her family. She was smart and kind, with a sense of humor that matched James's perfectly. Austin and Julia watched their son fall in love with the same headlong intensity they had experienced, and they gave their blessing gladly. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the valley in attendance. Julia made Catherine's dress, pouring all her skill and love into every stitch. Austin stood beside James as he made his vows, and when he looked at Julia across the crowd, she saw tears in his eyes. "Our boy is a man now," he said that night, holding her close. "He is, and we raised him well." Julia kissed his jaw. "He will build a good life with Catherine just as we built ours. It goes too fast." "It does, but we still have Sarah, and she shows no signs of wanting to leave any time soon." Sarah, at 16, was indeed showing no interest in settling down. She had her heart set on studying art in San Francisco, a plan that filled Austin with horror and Julia with pride. They argued about it gently, Austin wanting to keep his daughter close and safe, Julia knowing that some birds needed to fly. "She has to find her own way," Julia told him. "Just like we did. But San Francisco is so far and so dangerous." "Everywhere is dangerous, my love, We cannot protect her from the world forever." Julia took his hand. "We have to trust that we taught her well, that she can handle whatever comes." In the end, Austin relented, though not happily. They sent Sarah to San Francisco with enough money for tuition and boarding and strict instructions to write every week. The house felt empty without her vibrant presence, but Julia kept busy with her dress shop and Austin threw himself into the ranch work. Letters arrived regularly, full of Sarah's adventures and observations. She was thriving in the city, her talent recognized by her instructors. She sent home sketches and paintings, scenes of city life that were so different from the mountain landscape they knew. 2 years later, she returned home with a young man named Thomas, an art dealer from Chicago. He was polite and clearly besotted with Sarah, and after a few days of Austin's not-so-subtle interrogation, he asked for permission to marry her. "You will take her far from here," Austin said, the words heavy with resignation. "I will, sir. But I promise to take care of her, to support her art, to make her happy." Thomas met Austin's eyes steadily. "I know I am taking something precious from you. I do not do so lightly." Austin looked at his daughter, seeing not the little girl who had wrapped herself around his heart, but a woman grown, capable, and confident. "Julia," he said finally, "what do you think? I think Sarah is old enough to know her own mind, and I think Thomas is a good man who will treat her well." Julia smiled at her daughter. "And I think we have to let her go, as much as it hurts." The second wedding was smaller, held in the church in Prescott. Sarah wore a dress of her own design that Julia brought to life with her sewing skills. She was beautiful, radiant, and when she said her vows, her voice was strong and sure. After the ceremony, as Sarah and Thomas prepared to leave for their new life in Chicago, Austin pulled his daughter aside. "I am proud of you," he said gruffly. "Your mother and we are so proud of the woman you have become." "I learned from the best," Sarah hugged him fiercely. "You and Mother showed me what real love looks like. That is what I want with Thomas. Then you have my blessing. Just promise you will write. Every week, I promise." Austin watched them drive away and felt Julia's hand slip into his. "It is just us again," she said softly, "like it was in the beginning. Are you sad?" "A little, but also grateful." Austin turned to look at his wife, seeing the young woman he had fallen in love with still present in her face, mixed with the maturity of years. "We raised 2 good people. They will make their own mark on the world. That is all a parent can hope for." The ranch settled into a new rhythm. James and Catherine built a house on the far edge of the property, starting their own family. Julia and Austin became grandparents to 3 healthy grandchildren who ran wild on the ranch, just as their father had. Sarah wrote regularly from Chicago, her letters full of news about exhibitions and sales, and eventually about her own pregnancy. Austin and Julia grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant. On cold winter nights, they sat by the fire and remembered their first winter together, the storm that had seemed like the end but had actually been a beginning. "We have been lucky," Julia said one evening, her head resting on Austin's shoulder. "Lucky does not cover it. We have been blessed." Austin kissed her hair, still soft though now more gray than auburn. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had taken shelter somewhere else that day. Then you would have frozen and I would have starved, and 2 stubborn people would have missed out on the greatest love story of the territory." Julia smiled. "But you did not. You found me, or I found you, or the storm brought us together. However it happened, I am grateful. As am I." Every single day. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, the ranch house bursting with noise and laughter. Sarah had come from Chicago with her family, and the house felt complete again, filled with the people they loved most in the world. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Austin and Julia walked out to the porch. The stars were brilliant, the air cool but not cold. Summer was fading into fall, and soon the first snows would come to the mountains. 30 years, Julia marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Austin pulled her close, and she fit against him as perfectly as she had that first night when they huddled together for warmth. If I could go back and tell that half-frozen cowboy what his future held, he would not have believed me. If I could go back and tell that terrified girl that everything would work out better than she ever imagined, she would not have believed me either. Julia looked up at the sky, at the same stars that had watched over them through every season of their lives. But here we are, Austin echoed, still together, still in love, always in love. Julia reached up and kissed him, a kiss that held 3 decades of passion and partnership, of struggles overcome and joys shared. Until my last breath I will love you, and I you. Austin held her tighter, suddenly aware of how precious every moment was, how quickly time passed. Thank you for saying yes that night, for taking a chance on a broken man in a snowstorm. Thank you for opening the door, for letting me in. Julia's eyes shone with tears. You saved my life in more ways than one. They stood together on the porch of the home they had built, looking out over the land they had tamed and the family they had raised. Behind them, the house was full of love and laughter, the legacy of a choice made in desperation that had become the foundation of something beautiful. The years continued their march as they always do. Austin's joints began to ache in the cold, and Julia's eyes grew weaker, requiring spectacles for her sewing. But their love never faltered, never dimmed. They remained partners in every sense, facing each challenge together, celebrating each victory side by side. On their 40th anniversary, James organized a celebration that brought people from all over the territory. The ranch was packed with friends and family, all gathered to honor the couple who had become legends in their own way. Not for wealth or fame, but for the way they loved each other, the way they had built a life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. The pastor from Prescott, an old friend by now, stood to make a toast. I have married many couples in my years, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. But Austin and Julia Donovan represent something special. They show us what marriage should be, 2 people choosing each other every single day through storms both literal and metaphorical. They are an inspiration to us all. Austin stood and pulled Julia to her feet beside him. We are not special, he said, though his voice was rough with emotion. We simply loved each other enough to fight for what we built. Life gave us challenges, but it also gave us each other, and that made all the difference. Julia squeezed his hand. The secret, she added with a smile, is to marry your best friend. To choose someone you like as much as you love, someone who makes you laugh even when you want to cry, someone who stands beside you instead of behind or in front of you. The crowd applauded, and then the music started, fiddles and guitars playing the old songs they loved. Austin swept Julia into a dance, moving carefully to accommodate their aging bodies but still moving together. 40 years, Julia whispered as they swayed. And I would do it all again. 40 more, Austin replied. I want 40 more, greedy man, when it comes to you always. They danced until the stars came out, until the younger folks took over the floor and they could retreat to the porch, their special place. James brought them coffee, doctored with a little whiskey against the chill, and they sat in their familiar chairs, watching their family celebrate. We did good, Austin said quietly. We did, Julia agreed. We did very good indeed. As the night deepened and the celebration continued without them, Austin and Julia sat hand in hand, Two people who had found each other in a storm and built a love that had weathered every season. The frozen trails that had once kept Julia prisoner were long melted, replaced by well-worn paths that led home. And the cowboy who had helped her find freedom had become her partner, her love, her everything. They had faced blizzards and droughts, loss and triumph, the pain of letting children go and the joy of watching them thrive. Through it all they had each other, and that had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and bright, bearing witness to a love that had started in desperation and grown into something magnificent. Two strangers brought together by a storm had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, written in the lives of their children and grandchildren, in the stories told around fires on cold winter nights. Austin and Julia Donovan had found each other when they both needed saving, and in saving each other, they had built something that would last forever. A love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Wild West, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures come from simply choosing to stay, to fight, to love with everything you have. And as they sat together under the stars, their hands still clasped after 40 years, they knew with absolute certainty that they had been given the greatest gift of all, a lifetime with the right person, and the wisdom to treasure every single moment of it. The frozen trails had long since thawed, but the path they had forged together would remain forever, a testament to the power of love, courage, and two hearts brave enough to weather any storm.